Thank you.
Open up this waiting room and remove these AI people because we don't want them in.
That's right.
Strange, isn't it?
Oh,
They just start automatically.
I know, and I
I have
hate
to
it.
figure out how to turn it off. I wasn't excited about that.
And then you have to like choose not to report them.
Yes, I've gotten Zoom recordings of things that I know I didn't record. So that's a little disconcerting.
So I'm just going to keep letting people in and then, hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. How are you?
Hello.
Everybody's settling in. It's going to be a lovely session. So excited to
Hey,
have
Melissa
Lillian
and
here
Mia.
today.
Well, thank
Hi,
you. Thank
Karen.
Melissa's trying to get her foster dog under control there.
Oh my goodness.
He likes to photobomb.
Girl, what are you doing?
I'm
I was away for the weekend. I think she missed me.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, there's an awesome exhibit at the JP Morgan Library about Belle de Costa Green that I got to see. So amazing.
Take that as a recommendation for the next time I'm in the Big Apple.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I'm going to keep letting him in, but I think, Deborah, whenever you're ready.
Okay, you can. I'm just grabbing my charger just in case. Okay.
Very good point.
So let me know when we're ready to get started.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, hello, everyone, and
Hello.
welcome. We have a fabulous event today where we're having a fireside chat with Lillian Lincoln Lambert and moderated by our own Karen Stanley. And I'm Deborah McConkey. I'm on the board of HPSWA and also chair of programming. So I'm thrilled to have these two fabulous women today. First, let me introduce Karen, and then she will introduce and have a chat with Lillian. Karen is the owner and managing consultant for Key Success Factors Consultants. So she provides strategic planning, public affairs, and fund development services. But that's only part of what she does. She's also VP of Finance and Marketing at Stanley Construction Company in Huntsville, Alabama, and which has been operating since 1961. And the company has even received national acclaim when it was awarded the U.S. Small Business Administration Person of the Year in 2001. And that was received by Thornton Stanley. So please welcome Karen. Take it away.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you so much. And I want to wish a happy February to everyone. Looks like we have about 19 people now. Feel free to zoom in and turn your cameras on and just say hello. And when we really get into the midst of the talk, we'll go, I think it'll freeze for Lillian and for me. I am so excited, always excited, because spoiler alert, this is the third or fourth time I have interviewed Lillian, but I'm going to ask the questions as though I don't know the answers. And I do always learn something new every time. So I definitely will. But I'm going to ask the questions from the point of view that perhaps you do not know as much about Lillian as I do. But when you learn, you are going to want her to be your friend as well. Because I just want to start by saying that in addition to our both being board members of the Harvard Business School African American Association, through our work with that group, we have just become friends over the past 2 years, and it has been really wonderful, Lillian. I just want to say
Thank you.
first that I appreciate that so much. And in case you all didn't know, Lillian is the first African American woman to have graduated from Harvard Business School. She is class of 1969. Yeah, we can stop and give an applause right there, because whether you want to talk about Black History Month or Women's History Month, or even if you don't want to talk about that, although we always should lift up everyone and be inclusive, I think we're in a safe space here to say that we honor diversity and inclusion. And so had Harvard not made some distinctive moves to diversify the MBA program, it would have been a lot later than 1969 for people who look like Lillian and me to have come through the program. What you might not know about Lillian is that she is something of what would be called today she was a non-traditional student, meaning she did not go to college right from high school. And I'm gonna not spoil her thunder, and she can share some of those twists and turns. But also, if I share my screen, you will see that Lillian, in addition to just having been the first African American to graduate from Harvard Business School, she's an author. This is her book, The Road to Someplace Better: From the Segregated South to Harvard Business School and Beyond. And indeed, she did go beyond. Lillian is an entrepreneur. She founded a company that was specializing in janitorial services through government contracts, and she was one of the first African American women to do so. 25 years later, she strategized her exit and sold that business, and she is enjoying a fulfilling life today in consulting and mentoring, and also leading her family. She has children and grandchildren, and she's now working on what I think is going to be a second book, Lillian, thanks to a gift that her daughters gave her for Christmas, whereby each week she receives an email and it asks a question about her life, something that they want to know, or something that this platform thinks that everyone should have known about themselves. And we're going to get another book out of this. So The Road to
Okay, Karen.
Someplace Better is a fascinating memoir. And in the notes, Lillian says, I wrote this memoir to share the life lessons I learned on a journey that took many twists and turns. The message of my book is dream big, act bold, and don't be afraid to blaze your own path to someplace better. Who knows, your path may be someone else's highway. And so, with that, we'll jump into our conversation. Lillian, in fact, the HBSWA entitled our chat today, Dream Big, Act Bold. In your own words, how and when did you begin to dream big?
Well, I guess I started dreaming big maybe as a child growing up on a farm. I had no idea what the someplace better was. I just knew it had to be something better than the life I had on the farm. I grew up in a very small town in Virginia, and my father had a farm, and he grew. I tell people we grew everything we ate, which is probably much healthier than what people are eating today. But I didn't appreciate it then, and I just kept saying, "There's got to be something better." I was the youngest of 7 children, and all of my other siblings had left home, gone away to work, None of them went to college. So I didn't have anyone to sort of mentor me about college. My mom, however, did go to college. She graduated from what is now Virginia State College in 1922, which was unheard of women going to college, and even particular Black women. And I regret not having discussed in more detail what that was like. But, you know, as you're younger, 18, 20 years old, you're not interested in what your parents did. You don't want to know any of that stuff. So that's why I'm telling people to write it down now. So I just wanted to get off the phone. I didn't go to college. My mom desperately wanted me to go to college, but there was no money to go. So I used that as an excuse, which was not a really good excuse because there was money available. I had a cousin who grew up in a similar environment that I did, and he went to college, but I didn't want to go to college. I thought I could make enough money without a college education. And my dream at that time was simply to get off the farm, go to a big city, get me a good paying job, meet Prince Charming, and live happily ever after. So what did I do? I took off to New York City from this little farm. I didn't know, I'd never been to New York, didn't know what to expect, but I said it had to be better than what I had. I My goal was to just be a secretary. I just thought that would be a fabulous job working in an office for someone being a secretary. But when I got to New York, I couldn't find a job as a secretary. This was in 1958, very much still segregated, even in New York. And they weren't hiring Black girls to be secretaries. I had to try 2 or 3 times to even get a job working in an office. I worked as a maid for a year or so and hated that. I said, this is not the someplace better I'm thinking about. It's got to be something else. But one thing I tell people, one thing working as a maid, I worked for a family who lived on Fifth Avenue. It exposed me to the way people live who had money. I had not seen that before. And I sort of liked what I saw. And I said, this is the kind of life I want to live. So that's maybe the beginning of where I wanted to go. I just had no idea how to get there. I knew I couldn't get where I wanted to go working as a maid. So I kept trying to get this job. I did finally get a job at Macy's, but I couldn't live on the salary, which seems like a lot of money at the time. It was $45 a week. But by the time I paid my car fare, paid my rent, and bought food, I didn't have any money left on payday. I finally left New York because this dream I had of the big city was not being realized. And I think the way I initially got this dream that the big city was where things were really happening is we had relatives who lived in New York. They came home, particularly in the summer for homecoming at the church, and they all looked so successful and prosperous, you know, dressed well, driving nice cars, and just saying how great life was. So I thought the secret was New York. Obviously, I was wrong. It didn't work for me. And I don't know how well it was working for those people who were living there. Maybe they borrowed the clothes and borrowed the cars too. I don't know. But it looked good when they came home. So it had a great impression upon me, this younger child. So you never know what impression you have on younger people as you go about your life. So I finally moved to Washington, D.C. and got a job in the federal government. My first job was in a Veterans Administration working in a big typing pool. And I was the youngest person there, and about 30 women. I think there were 2 guys there. And it didn't take me long to realize this isn't it either. So I said, it's got to be something else. And I met a good friend there. We stayed friends for years. And I told her one day, I cannot do this forever. I have got to do something else. So what are you going to do? I said, I don't know, but it's not here. I finally was living with a family, and her nephew lived there also, and he worked in the federal government. He was going to Howard University at night. He started inviting me to go to some of the parties he went to with his classmates. So that's how I got exposed to Howard. And I said, this looks like fun. So my initial thought was, well, college is going to be fun. Maybe I ought to go. But I finally did decide to enroll in college at night because I couldn't afford to go full time still. I enrolled at what is now District of Columbia University, working full-time job, going to college at night. I took, I think, 6 hours each semester, and that was going to take me a long time to get my degree. I did that for about a year, but I said, this is not going to get me where I want to go. I'll be 30 years old before I get my degree. I finally talked to a cousin who went to college out of high school, as I should have. And he had a similar life that I have. He didn't have any money and lived with his grandparents because both his parents were deceased. So I asked him to help me find money to go to college, and he did. So I enrolled in Howard University. I did get a scholarship. I got a loan, and I worked full time the whole time I was there. So I didn't have the fun of college as going in. I was 22 when I started college. There's a big difference, 4 years difference at that age bracket. At age range is a lot. It doesn't seem like a lot as you get older, but then I'd been out in the world, had this experience. I'm in the classroom with a lot of 18-year-olds who were leaving home for the first time and still had their parents to fall back on. I had no one to fall back on. So I enrolled in Howard, and that's when my life really changed, and I began to see a direction in the way I wanted to go. I didn't know what I wanted to major in. I just knew I had to go to college. But I took a course, Introduction to Business, which was taught by Professor H. Naylor Fitzhugh. That introduced me to business and also introduced me to the case method of teaching. He graduated from Harvard Business School in 1931, one of the first Black men to get an MBA. And he used the teaching method of the case method when he taught his courses at Howard. Of course, the courses were much simpler and shorter, but the technique was the same. And I liked that method of teaching. I also liked him as a professor. So that made me decide to major in business. So now I think maybe I'm finally finding my road to someplace better, still not knowing where it's going to lead.
Now, Lillian, this is all so exciting, and I could sit and listen all day, but just so also to help our viewers and listeners note the high points, I've picked up on three key success factors already. You said number one was a desire to be somewhere better. And I think we see that in so many of the self-help books, whether it's, you know, Think and Grow Rich or Seven Habits for Successful People. It generally starts with you've got to want something, you've got to want, and then it talks about the goal and refining your goals. So you have this desire to get off that farm, but you didn't have at that time the key success factor that you mentioned you started to obtain in New York, which was exposure. You didn't know what someplace better was. That indicates that you didn't have necessarily in your close proximity role models. Your mother was a college graduate, but as you mentioned, you kind of took that for granted. You didn't realize what a trailblazer she had been to be a Black woman graduating from college in 1922. So, first of all, also a family of trailblazers. Maybe we better put DNA in there because blazing trails is in your blood. I mean, kudos to your mother in 1922. Because also being a native of the South, I'm from Alabama. I can just think about what was going on in Alabama in 1922 in my own family, and it was basically chopping cotton, and maybe going to a Rosenwald school, which would be a one-room schoolhouse, since we're talking about Black History Month. Um, Everyone doesn't start on a level playing field. We know that. And so, to the extent I want to offer this call to action, that anyone can be a role model, don't be ashamed to share your story. This is what inspires people to know that they can reach higher heights. And that kind of brings me to a second point you mentioned, which would be continue upward. If you make one step and that's not what you thought it was, you were a maid in New York. And I was like, just got to be something better still. I'm off the farm, but not making too much money as a maid. Let's try Macy's. At least that feels like a more, whatever environment. But the fact is, they're not really paying very much over a living wage. Still trying to, at least you had the exposure. You were like, wow, it'd be great if I could make enough money to live like this. But clearly, Maid wasn't it. Macy's wasn't it. And you started now paying more attention to the value of education. I think that's another key success factor. And it's something that we all have to keep in mind. Education is potentially going to become more out of reach for more Americans, you know, in the current administration. And so we have to pay attention to providing resources so that maybe where some resources will be withheld, you know, somebody's got to fill in the gap. So the desire, the exposure, the determination, I guess, determination to continue upward until you got closer and closer to that dream. So those are just some very amazing key success factors, Lillian. And I
Well,
also,
I think also, Cam, we got to put in mention
Mhm,
exposure, and I think exposure is critical. And I
mhm,
encourage people, young people, to expose their kids to as much as they can. I grew up on the farm, and I mentioned my mother was a college educated, but my father was an uneducated man. He went to the third grade, so there was frequent time conflict in our household about the value of education. My mom thought it was, my dad thought it wasn't. So we had to fight that battle. And I ended up being an entrepreneur, but I was not exposed to anyone who owned a business. The only business owner that I knew growing up, well, I had an aunt who owned a small service station and a little grocery store. That was my exposure. Being an entrepreneur was not a word that was even in my vocabulary. So exposure meant a lot. And even though my experience in New York was not as pleasant as I had expected, it exposed me to a wider, the surroundings were different. I got to see different things. And then moving to DC was again the exposure. So I did it in steps, and it's important, I think, that you not be afraid to admit. I don't necessarily call it failure. Something didn't work. It might mean you're just going in the wrong direction. You may need to change your direction. You got to change things. Don't just stay at a place because you're there. Now, this is a decision I made. I got to stay here. Do something about it if it's not where you want to be.
so true. Well, that sounds like the value that you've embraced in your lifelong resilience. If something doesn't work, stick with the plan. If the first plan doesn't work, stick with the movement. Keep moving. I guess I could quote Dr. Martin Luther King: if you can't fly, then ride. If you can't ride, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, keep moving forward. And so I think that your path is a perfect example of that, even though you didn't always know where the path would lead, which leads me to this question. When you don't know where your path would lead, how can you or how did you find the courage to go into the unknown?
I think that's something I can attribute to my mother's support. And she always instilled in me that I could do whatever I wanted. And I took it at face value. I just don't think that if I decide I want to do something, I don't think there's a reason that I can't make it happen. I may run into roadblocks and get deterred, but if I want to do it bad enough, I think I can make it happen. Uh, when I was at now going to Harvard Business School, that wasn't on my agenda either. I had no plans to go, didn't want to go, had no intention of applying. And the only reason I applied was because Professor Fitzhugh and another professor, Dr. Wilford White, encouraged me to apply. And literally, I felt they would bug me, they harassed me to apply. And I finally applied, so they would just leave me alone. And I said, because I'm going to be 26 when I get my undergrad degree. Most people are well into that career. I still hadn't made any money. That good paying job I expected off the farm had not happened. So when I graduated from Howard, I just wanted to go out, get a job, make some money, and start living the quote good life. But Professor Fitzhugh, as they threw a monkey wrench in it when he started talking about graduate school. So I felt, well, I had a lot of respect for him. I said, well, maybe if he thinks I should go to graduate school, maybe I at least ought to act like I'm interested, which I wasn't, and apply. Well, of course, I applied and I expected I would get accepted, and then I would just go do these 2 years and go on. Well, the big shock came when I applied and they rejected my application. Then I was furious. All of a sudden, I wanted to go. And I said, no, what do they mean I can't go to Harvard? Professor Fitzhugh said I'm Harvard material, and I think I am too now. So why can't I go to the school? So I contacted the school and found out why they rejected my application. And they told me that I had not scored high enough on my graduate management admission test. Well, I wasn't surprised because I didn't even know I had to take that test until after I applied. Someone told me that was required. So I didn't take that serious, did no preparation. I just showed them, took the test. So I asked, well, what do I need to do to get in? They said, you can retake the test and reapply, but still no guarantee. Well, I said to myself, I don't need a guarantee. All I need to know is know what I need to do. So then I became serious. I retook the test, scored better, reapplied. I got in the next year, which was probably that 1 year break may have still been good for me. I purposely took a job that I knew I didn't want to keep. And by I knew it was a secretary's job. I finally got this job as a secretary. Now I didn't want to be a secretary. I took that job for 1 year as secretary to the managing editor at the Washington Post in D.C. And then I enrolled at in Harvard Business School in September of 1967. Had never been to Boston, had never been to the school, had no idea what to expect. But I certainly didn't expect to be the only Black woman there. All I hadn't even thought about it. Now I'm thinking Professor Fitzhugh probably knew that. And he probably thought that I had what it took to deal with that situation. I'm not sure. I never really talked to him about it. But when I got there, in addition to that, the women could not live on the business school campus. They didn't let women into school until 1963, and this was 67. The dorms had always been designed for men, and they had not remodeled them to make it amenable to women students. We had to live at the Radcliffe graduate dorm, which was across the river about half a mile or more away, and walk to school every day. We had to dress as business women and men, which meant suits for the men and dresses or skirt suits for the women with heels, no pants, none of that, even in the snow. Now, the men, on the other hand, who lived on the business school campus, if the weather was inclement, they could simply go down into the tunnel and walk underground to their classroom without even having to go outside. So women had it much more difficult than the men. And there were in 68 out of class of the first and second year class of about 800 students, there were 9 Blacks and 36 women. So both groups were very small numbers. And
very small, very small. Now, Lillian, that is leading into another topic. You had your 5 topics that you talk about in your book: persistence, resilience, faith, morality, and courage. Now, we've talked about resilience and courage. I can see the persistence in that you had to apply twice to business school. And this is something that we need to let people know, especially I feel this generation. And I think you have said something about that, if you will share with us. That some of our younger generation is kind of microwave. They if you don't get it the first time, they don't seem to embrace the if at first you don't succeed, try again. That's persistence. How do you think we can help to bring more persistence to the younger generation? Because that's acting bold. Let's remember that the topic of today is taken from part of your book jacket: dream big, act bold. Part of acting bold is refusing to accept no for an answer, or refusing to sit down when someone else may say you can't do this, but persisting. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think in my situation, I had to go through a lot of struggles and things because my parents were not, I don't think my father would have helped as much anyway. My mom, I think, probably wanted to be helped more than she could, but she didn't have the means or the whereabout to help me in ways that would have been more beneficial. The difference today is that many parents can help their kids a lot more than we could. And sometimes I think we go too far in helping them. We don't want them to have any difficult situations. And sometimes they only learn by having the experiences of a little hard time. Uh, and it's not easy to say no to your kids who you know need something. Well, one of the experiences that I have, I'll share with you a story with one of my daughters. They both went to college, and my oldest, I say, I had a hard time keeping her out of school. She loved going. My youngest, I had a hard time keeping her in school. She just kept dropping out of school. She'd go to college, she'd drop out, she'd drop. I finally said, that's it. I'm not paying for another dime of college for you. And a few years later, after she was out working a couple of years, she called me one day and says, Mom, is there any more money in my college fund? I said, no.
Oh,
She went out and found the money, went back to school, got her undergraduate degree, then even got her master's degree. But now she says she's trying now to instill this stuff in her daughter. Don't do what I did, because I could have gone and finished school and it was easier, but I didn't. And I had to do it the hard way. Now, if she had told me she was going back to school, had a good plan that I could see, I probably would have helped her. But the way I did help her, after she went to school and got her degree and had to borrow money, had student loans, I did pay off one of her student loans. So that was my way of paying her after the fact. But she had to go through the difficult times, and it's very hard to see your kids go through a difficult situation when you know you can help them. But sometimes we need to do, as they said, what the birds do. They push the birds out of the nest and they have to fly. They have to fly at some point. So if you can be there to catch them when they don't hit too hard, but let them have a chance to fly. I don't know how we get parents to see that, but I think that's one of the problems. Many of this younger generation, I think, have things a bit too easy. Everything is, I have to get it now, just click a button, and if it doesn't happen soon, I'm real upset. I have to go through some of that. So I'm open to ideas on suggestions on that, but I have some ideas of things people need to do, but getting them to see it that way is much more difficult.
and I hear what you said, that persistence is more readily learned when you have to go through some struggles. I remember also a theme that you've talked about sometimes, turning stumbling blocks into stepping stones. So let's say now you've decided to persist, but you feel like you keep coming against roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. How is it, or what is it that enables you to turn a stumbling block into a stepping stone?
Well, if I think you have to look at something as not necessarily a stumbling block. It's a temporary impediment that's keeping you from going someplace. You have to find a way to either go over it or get around it. I had to do that. Of course, I did when I went to school, but I also had that same kind of experience when I started my business, because I, at that time, the government 8A set aside program was very prominent. It had just come into existence. And I knew I'd worked for a company who was on that program. I knew the program very well and felt that I was a great candidate for it. First of all, I called myself the double minority, Black and female.
Mm-hmm.
Program was designed to help minorities get into business. So I'm a shoe-in. Not didn't happen when I applied for the program. They rejected my application. Again, I'm getting rejection. So by this time, I've learned that rejection is not a final answer. I'm saying, okay, so I can't get in the program. All I had to do is think about, okay, what do I need to do now to turn this thing around? And first of all, I had done my homework, prepared myself to show that I could get my own contracts, but I was also prepared to fight even higher. I did have to threatened, I say, the Small Business Administration, that if they didn't allow me to program and help me get and allow me to get one of those contracts, then my next step was to talk to my congressperson and see if I can get them. You have to be able to move. Maybe you have to determine when to make those next moves, but you've got to be able, not afraid, to do what might seem a little bit drastic
Mm-hmm.
if you really want to get someplace.
Right. Well, that's the act bold, and that's courage again. It may seem like you're acting drastic, but if you are being maybe I want to say, if you are on the raw end of a double standard, meaning you really are qualified, but for some reason you're being held back, then you do have to have the courage, whether it's something like an appeal, apply again. And then, of course, there are stories of people who literally have to sue for their business. If you know
Yeah.
that you are, for example, and I don't know how much longer these programs are going to last, but say you're an 8A contractor and you are not getting your share and you're never getting your share. I have heard of people who will sue that, this organization or agency is using public funding and they're not distributing it in any way close to parity in terms of the population, and some people have had to get their business by suing for it. So now there's another issue though, and a story I would love for you to tell and share with people about morality, because I think you were faced with some situations where
Yeah.
you didn't get the business, or either you didn't take the business, and really it was
Yeah.
morality that came into play.
Yeah, and I think that's even more important today because it seems to me that the morality in our country now is at a low bottom. People are doing all kinds of unethical things and tempted to do things. People feel like in order to get where I want to go, I got to go along with the crowd. Well, I was fairly new in business and my business was growing, and there was a local contract in Washington D.C. that I desperately wanted. It would have been one that would prestigious contract, would have done great for my portfolio. And I knew the contracting officer quite well. And I talked to him about bidding. He told me I could bid on the job. And he went so far as to say, well, and I can assure you that I can get the contract for you. And I said, great. But then he threw me a curveball. He said, but I had to give him a kickback. Well, I was not, I did not lower my values based on giving him a kickback. I turned down his offer and I felt good about it. I didn't get the contract, but I also didn't have to feel I had done something unethical, or this was certainly not within my guidelines of the way I was trained and grew up. So, and he ended up really having a lot of problems later on, because at some point, when you get involved in things like that, it catches up with you, I think. Either they're going to be asking for more and more, it's like blackmail, or you're going to be tempted to do it another time and something just doesn't happen. I did not get that contract, but I felt good about having made that decision. And I don't think it negatively impacted my company's growth at all. I was able to get other contracts and I grew gradually, which was good. So I think you need to determine what your values are and be willing to live by them. And don't let anybody else determine what your values should be. You determine them for yourself and be willing to live by them. Now, one thing Karen talked earlier about, they talk about the diversity, etc. It's interesting. When I went to Harvard, to the business school in 1967, 69, there was no diversity program. But interesting, I did have a couple of people one time ask me, did you get into Harvard on the affirmative action program? And I just laughed at them. I said,
Are you a
what affirmative
DEI
action
hire?
program?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people are so quick to assume that you went someplace because of some privilege that you didn't have, and you're fighting to get everything you can. Everybody wants the same thing, basically, a good life. We may define it differently, but most people just want an opportunity to be successful and to show their capabilities and what they can do. And if they can't do it, they should suffer the consequence like everybody else.
Absolutely. But why don't we also go ahead and talk about the fact that, you and your colleagues, which you said, I think there were only 8 African Americans at Harvard when you came, or 6,
There were
and
9.
the
There
way
was 6
that
in the first year class and 3 in the second year class. First year
3 in
class.
the
There were
second
3
year.
guys in the second year class and 5 guys and me in the first year class. And we were all very, particularly the first year students were very upset that there was such a small representation of Black students there. This is a premier school for training managers. So why aren't we being trained so we can participate in this corporate America or whatever way we want to decide? So we decided somebody needed to do something, so why not us? And we decided we would take this on. It was very risky. We didn't know how to approach it. One of the guys had been talking to the admissions office, was getting a lot of kickback and threatened to be kicked out of school, etc. We decided first, maybe we just want to go talk to the dean. And we didn't know if he agreed to meet with us or not, but he was very receptive, and he came in, listened to our issues and heard our concerns. And at the end of the meeting, we had an agreement. He agreed to send us back to our alma maters and other universities. He said they didn't know where to find the Black students, but that's historically Black
Typical
colleges, a logical
excuse.
place to start. But anyhow, he was willing to send us back to our alma maters, other colleges, while he went out and got scholarship money. And he delivered on his promise, and we delivered on ours. There was no scholarship money available when I went. I had to get a loan, but better late than never. So that next year we found students all over the country, different universities to apply, and we wanted to be sure that we chose students that we felt could deal with the situation they'd have to deal with at the business school. They accepted that next year 27 Black students, and they all graduated. So after that, we started the African American Student Union as a support system for those students, which was not something that was there when I was there. And we also impressed upon them the importance of being successful there, that it wasn't an easy journey, and they had to be prepared to deal with what they had to deal with at the university. And as I said, they all graduated.
I love that. I love that. So, on that note, the final item I'll underscore is the power of organizing and the strength in numbers, the importance of a support system. We can say that alumni organizations such as Harvard Business School Women's Association, Harvard Business School African American Association, these are examples of how we can set up and participate in and lead. Somebody's got to start the Zoom call, somebody's got to put out the newsletter. So it's usually work, but as you said, somebody's got to do something. And the power of organizing helps you to leverage your own one person's desire to make something better, but with more people, you can really effectuate change. And I think that message is as important today as it was in 1967. Was that right, when you first went there? And
Right.
I want to say thank you as we move now to open it up for questions and answers and general discussion. I have to say thank you, Lillian, for starting the AASU, of which I was a member and program chair for the AASU conference. I see my colleagues Nina Henderson and Ray Eason, who are my successors as co-presidents of the HBS African American Association, because I really, really believe in the power of organizing and the support system. And so when the world doesn't support you, you have to identify and attract to yourself and organize and get in a collective that will support you. So again, thank you for starting that support, for being that person who said, I may be the first, but I won't be the last. And I'm determined that I won't be the last. So if we can open it up, I see a hand raised already from Jenny and then Renata.
Hi, Lillian. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So impressive. And thank you for going through everything you went through to achieve what you've done. It's really impressive. I also was in ASU as an ally. And my question for you is, what suggestions do you have for allies to help further, what could have been done to help further support you, or what suggestions do you have to help support African Americans in business today?
Okay, well, as an ally, you can be very supportive in getting other people to become allies also, and opening doors where you can. Because there's sometimes doors that an ally can open that you can't open. So help them, introduce them to people, and also dispel some of the myths that you hear. There's so many myths about other groups of people, or people who are not like us, whether it's race, nationality, ethnic, or religion, or what. You can help dispel those myths among people that you know. So find ways that, as you involved as an ally, look for opportunities where you can make a change or make things better.
I'm on it.
Thank you, Jenny. Renata?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing. Super incredible. What I'm curious about is, how did you create the courage, and how did you think about entrepreneurship? Because I mean, you took a series of risks. Your career maybe could have seemed as more risky than from someone that had a more traditional background. You didn't have family money to fall back on. So how did you think about that, and how did you take the jump?
Well, it sort of happened more by accident. I didn't plan to be an entrepreneur either, but the opportunity, the door was there. I saw an opening. The industry that I ended up going into, I knew nothing about it. I'd never before. I worked for a company in this industry for 3 years, but I didn't know anything about that business prior to that. So I learned the business quite well. In that company, I did everything, every function except the marketing. So at one time, a friend of mine, who was a consultant there, asked me had I ever thought of going into business. I said, not really. And the more I talked to him and the more I thought about it, this may be a good idea. And my idea was to start my business on a part-time basis while I kept my full-time job at this company and gradually get into it. And since I was going to be a competitor, had no intention of taking him his business, I decided I would share that information with him so he wouldn't hear from somebody else. Well, he agreed to keep me on for a while, but then about a week later, he thought I would leave and I got fired. So I'm out now with no job. My business hasn't started, and I'm married. Then I have 2 small children. My husband's working, but we were comfortable being a 2-income family, and now all of a sudden we're a 1-income family. So I gave myself 6 months to make it happen. This was in May, and since I was trying to go after government contracts, this meant by the government fiscal year was September 30th. I had to have a contract by then. So luckily, I had made good contacts in my position with this company. I knew a lot of people in the various agencies, and I drew upon those contacts. So you've got to be, first of all, willing to take the risk, not be afraid to ask for what you want from wherever you think you can get it. What's the worst they can do is say no. And be willing to dig deep into preparing yourself to overcome whatever obstacle may come up. And you won't be able to identify all of them. But if you're not in the mainstream, and mainstream in entrepreneur at that time was basically white men. If you're not one of those, you're going to have things thrown at you that they don't have to deal with. You've got to try and anticipate what they are and be prepared to deal with them. When I went into business in this industry, I did not know another female who owned this type of business. There weren't any. I don't think that I met a couple later on. But the ironic thing about it, 90% of the women who work in the industry are female. So why not be an owner? You have a much better understanding of it. There were no support groups like organizations support women business owners. National Association of Women Business Owners started, I think, the year before I started my business, so they weren't really up and running. So I did not have a lot to fall back on. Today, there are a lot more opportunities. There's probably a lot more risk, a lot more competition. But you've got, first of all, to feel that you can do it, be willing to take the risk. And even if what you start, if you're not successful the first time, that does not mean it's the end. Either find a better way of doing or find something else to do. I do think that I suggested that either you go into business, you go into something that you either know well or have somebody with you knows the basic information about that industry, but surround you with people who complement your skills. It's so easy to get people, bring people in who think and feel the way we do. Well, I don't think that's the best good business model. Bring people in who complement your skills.
Very good.
Hope that
Very good.
answers your question.
Thank you. I see a hand raised from Madeline.
Thank you, Karen. Lillian, so inspiring, unbelievable. I'm in the process of buying your book. So my earlier on in your conversation, you talked about taking steps and immersing yourself, I guess, in New York, and then decided to move to Washington, etc. I'm interested to know, these days we're taught about persisting and keeping to the course, breaking through, not giving up, etc. How did you know in yourself when it was time to actually change your course of action?
Well, it's hard to give you a specific thing that happens, it's almost like a gut feel. You know when it's time to go. Now what I'm dealing with, people are talking about, I'm in retirement now, downsizing. People talk to about, I need to downsize, I need to move. When should I do it? I said, you will know when it's time. You will know when you have done all you can at this particular junction. You need to either change things here or move to something else. It depends on the information you use, all the information you have surrounding you, what's going on with the positive, the negative, and how you deal with it. If you feel you can't do any more where you are, then it's time to move to something else. You may not even know what that something else is, but something different. And be willing to take the risk and make this. It requires lots of sacrifices. For instance, when I moved to New York, I lived with a cousin who had you know how tiny apartments are in New York? She had a one-bedroom apartment with three of us living there. And, that's cramped. But I couldn't afford a place of my own. You've got to be willing to make some sacrifices. I didn't have, for instance, people talk about getting a car. I was 28 years old before I got my first car. I couldn't afford a car. There were other things that were more important. Setting priorities on how you spend the resources that you have, which way you direct them. You just have to decide what things are priority in your life.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Well, we have just a few minutes left. Looks like about 8 minutes. Is there anyone who would like to share just in general how this seems relevant to you, or what has resonated with you, or if there's something that we already talked about that you'd like for Lillian to expand upon, please feel free at this time. I see Marianne.
Well, thank you, Karen and Lillian. This has been very inspiring. And I think that at HBS, we have this amazing community of women, but we haven't gone ahead like we want to. So what are your suggestions for some attainable small step and big step goals that we can work towards to really win for future generations of HBS women, and that will impact women in general?
And
Well, I guess you got to first.
Speaking, I'm sorry, individually or collectively, because that could be two different and two long answers.
So of course I would love to have long answers from Lillian, but I think as a community, because we get together and we know things that we should be doing, and individually it may not be enough, but collectively it could be really resonant. So
well,
how do we,
you've got to decide, where does the group want to go in a way that helps the group and people individually, and be sure that the group buys into it. You may have people saying things that they're going to do, but everybody's not on board. So where do you want to go, and what are the steps you need to take to get there? And people have to be willing to assume some responsibility for helping you get there, taking on the responsibility. In most organizations, there are always a few people that do all the work. Well, if it's a group, you need more people involved, helping you to get there. 2 or 3 people can't do it all. So what's the overall goal of the organization? What's the goal of the Women's Association? What do you want to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And how do you get there? Who needs to be involved? What's missing to help us get there? How do we fill that void? There are a lot of questions. But then as you ask the question, you begin to think of answers, and you will find out how many of the people are there to help you get to that goal. And there may be other people who are just there to tag along, and that's always going to be the case. Use them where you can. I hope that helps.
And what do you recommend for us? Because I think we have a lively group, and we just had the Women's Summit.
Well, I don't know that I could recommend what the organization ought to be. I don't know much about the Women's Association, but I'm sure there's a lot of history on what the mission is. What's your goal for next year? How do you get there? Those are steps maybe you have to do a reassessment. If you're not where you think you should be or where you want to be, maybe you got to reassess where you are and what is it you wanted to do that didn't happen, and why didn't it happen? But I don't know that I could recommend what you as your organization should be doing because I don't know enough about your mission and goals of where you want to go.
So I'm going to summarize then what you just said, because I think you gave me a good answer. We should decide what we want to measure as parameters for success, and then decide what's of value to us as a group and what will move women forward as a community. And so the first step is to figure out what our metrics are, because we can't improve what we can't measure.
Right, right.
So thank you.
Great. I see Wendy's hand raised.
Yes, thank you so much, Lillian. This is an honor, and Karen, you've done an excellent job. You did make it seem like it was the first time you were interviewing Lillian, so that was helpful. I guess I would say there were so many points that you raised that I could relate to, being the first in so many instances. And I guess I'm curious about if there's anything that you think that you would take away so that we can stop talking about the firsts. And what I mean by that is, I do think there's some people who really quite enjoy being the first. I am not one of them. I did it because that's, to your point, you got there and you didn't know you were the first. And a lot of times that was my circumstance as well. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit, just maybe from your own perspective about the, not maybe pros and cons, but like, what are some things that we could be doing to make that less of a thing?
Well, the first is to make, as you said, and I think Karen mentioned earlier, when you've been the first, make sure you're not the last. For me, seldom am I telling people I'm the first. It's usually other people who are talking about it. And to them, if that's important, that's fine. But what you don't need to do, if you're the first, you don't want to be capitalizing on the fact that I'm the first and I'll always be the first and the only. You don't want to be the only. That's a detriment. You want to make sure you make it possible for other people to follow. And I'm happy to say there are lots of women at Harvard now, like Black, white, all kinds of women. When I was there, 36 out of 1,600. It's probably 50% of the class now women, both of Black, white, any color, nationality you want. So I think that's the goal. I don't know that you can do anything to stop other people from recognizing, quote, first.
Yep.
Various people see this in different perspective. I think what's important is that the person who is the first doesn't see that as their legacy.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example of, and maybe, and this will be a good note for you, Karen, if you're closing, is I actually did something very specifically in my career to be the first Black person to do something at the firm I was at. And then I actually recognized after a few years, I thought I was creating an inroad for others. But the longer I stayed there, there was less impetus for them to do anything because they had their person. And so I actually recognized, and so that's one of the dangers of being the first, is that you also have to recognize that you can't stay, right? You have to keep moving.
You want to maybe you want to be the first, but you don't want to be the token.
Correct.
And I don't know that you can do anything to change a company's mindset if that's their goal. Maybe you want to be someplace, as you say, where you can have an impact on creating a pathway for others, as opposed to, well, we got our one, that's all we need.
Right, especially if you're not empowered in a position where you can hire others. It's very difficult to open a path when your own resources are limited, if you're not a hiring manager and so forth.
But the person in that position has to be willing and comfortable to make that move. You may be in a situation where you're comfortable, you have a great job, everything's working well for you, but you know what the situation is. Are you willing to get out of that situation so you can have a greater impact? And that's a personal decision, but that's the way life is.
And on that note,
so much.
That's the way life is. I love that as an ending, to dream big, act bold. And I would also offer the idea that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So there are these various twists and turns on our path to the road to someplace better. The best thing that you can do, and this might be my answer to your question, Wendy, is be prepared. Be prepared, be prepared for the next opportunity, even though you don't know what the next opportunity might be. The next opportunity might be the chance to speak in the manager's meeting to say, hey, you didn't hire a person that I know would have done a great job. The next opportunity might be one of the board members comes to you and says, we're thinking about having a different startup. Would you peel off with us, and so forth? So those are opportunities, and you don't always know when or where opportunities are going to come from. So
Might I add, go ahead. I would like to close. Someone mentioned getting the book. Anybody who wants to order my book, if you order on my website, I can send you a signed copy. It is also available on Amazon, but if you order on my website, I can send a signed copy.
Absolutely. That is what we want you to do, because you'll see and read so many more exciting stories in Lillian's book, The Road to Someplace Better. Thank you, Alexi, for putting that in the chat. It's right there. And with that, we've just about used up our time. I turn it back over to the officers in case they have closing remarks or announcements.
Yes, thank you so much, Lillian. This was inspirational, and Karen for asking all the right questions that really revealed so much. So thanks everyone for coming. I just want to remind you, our next event is next week. Well, we have roundtables, of course, happening each week, but next week is Happiness Works, the Science of Positive Psychology. And I can't think of a better time for needing a topic like that with everything going on in the world. And that is February 11th, 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 noon Eastern. And I hope to see many of you there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.